I'm Dave Gardy. It's now back 12:20 Eastern Time, and we're ready for the next panel, which is going to be moderated by Terry Roberts, who's CEO and President of Whitehawk Incorporated Cybersecurity Exchange. We're going to have some of the participants in this panel because we're noticing that in the room when we've got lots of Zoom during this congestion problem they're having, there is more issues with the audio, which is what we're trying to get through. So we may have some people shut their video off. I'll turn it over to Terry, and we'll go from there.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Dave. Great to be here. So happy that we were able to do this using your wonderful services. I'm really ecstatic to be able to moderate our industry panel and take everything that we heard before us and throw it back from an industry perspective where actually we're the ones that are going to have to implement CMMC. So this is a critical perspective. I'd like to introduce our panelists. First, we have Ed Bassett. Ed is a career computer scientist, cyber innovator, and entrepreneur. Ed is currently the CISO at Neo Systems and was previously the founder of Metasecurity and president of GP Project and VP at Cyber. Next, we have Johan Detweiler. Johan is a career information security solution architect and government regulation consultant. Johan is currently the Director of Operations and Security at Talitech and previously was Risk and Compliance Lead at Chickasaw Nation Industries. The following panelist is Jim Shifalakwa, career computer scientist with a focus on cyber and information security. He is currently the VP and CISO at Periton and previously was the CISO at Quotient 3 and VP and CISO at Serco. Following that, we have Felix Weiss. Felix is a senior software developer and business information systems professional. Felix is currently the executive director at the Cyber Clan and previously at DavTech. I might have mispronounced that, so don't shoot me, Felix. And last but not least, we have Tom Tollerton. Tom is a career information systems, business, and cybersecurity management professional, currently the managing director of cybersecurity and data privacy services at Dixon Hughes Goodman, and previously a cybersecurity lead at SAIC and network engineer at Beals Inc. So you all should be extraordinarily impressed. What we'd like to do is start with short opening remarks so that you can see the different perspectives from each of these industry experts. Am I coming through okay, Dave? Okay. And so we're going to start out with what do they think is achievable across industry in the near term, but from their perspective regarding the implementation of CMMC. So Ed, can we start with you?
Thanks, Terry. My video, I'll work out okay. From my perspective as a service provider, CMMC is on the real world solutions, right? Finding ways to meet expectations, some of the things you heard Katie about, in ways that are affordable, operationally feasible, we can actually get it to work, and it's effective in countering the threat. And the idea is here that we really want not just the answering the mail in terms of checking the box. The DoD has been very clear that CMMC is not intended to be a checklist, but is our security posture. It's really effective to keep threat from stealing our intellectual property and affecting national security. I was at a conference, not 8A Association, so a conference of a little over 1,000 small businesses in the DoD space. I was on a panel with two representatives from the DoD. This was prior to CMMC coming in, and a question was asked from small business for what is the expectation of the government. And DoD rep at conference said we expect every contractor to meet every requirement at all times. And I guess my response at the time, and I thought still now, is reality is much different. Right? After working as a go-on consultant, probably over 100 clients, I've never found even a single that met every requirement all the time. Everybody's got things that are a little shaky on, they're working hard on. What CMMC intends to do, CMMC is to close the gap between that expectation, which is, I'll say a little bit, but it's a realistic expectation for the DoD, close the gap between that expectation and reality. So how does it do this? First is clarifying requirements. Under the NIST 800-171 and the DFARS, a lot of questions about what is the government's intent. There's really no one to ask. Contracting officer, maybe, answer. Standard published by NIST language. If you're a scientist, maybe tough if you're not. A lot of things left is the judgment call for the contractor. Those contractors have expressed in many forums. They have a lack of clarity is there. MC has done a really nice job of raising that up, put explanations and example into the standard. And as we're going to have as standards come out, I think it'll become even clearer what doesn't meet the requirements and what is good. Things are going to be answered well by CMMC. Second piece is measuring maturity. It's the first time we've
seen. Sorry.
Sure.
Ed,
yes.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but you started out a little bit clearer and then it went off. So I think I'm going to switch to Johan, but we'll come back and try you again. Okay. Okay. Johan, would you like to give us your perspectives on what is achievable across industry near term?
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. And thanks, Ed, for kind of starting to introduce the topics. And I just kind of want to pick up a little bit right where you left off talking about 800-171. I know a lot of people are really panicked out there because CMMC seems to be this big new thing, but there's a lot of really good news, especially for the first 3 levels. If you're trying to achieve a level 1 certification, the awesome news is that all 17 practices are included in 800-171 verbatim. So if you're looking for a way to assess yourself and determine if you've implemented those requirements, or if you want to implement those requirements and are trying to figure out what you need to do, you can go to 800-171A, and it will very clearly tell you exactly what you need to do in order for that to be considered implemented. When you look at level 2, all practices except for 7 of them are verbatim in 800-171. So again, you can use 800-171A to find out exactly what you need to do. For the 7 that aren't included, the good news is that they're taken from other security standards. Most of them are taken from 853. So you can go to 853A, and you can look and see exactly what it is that you're going to need to do and what you're going to be assessed against. And then when you go to level 3, all 110 requirements of 800-171 are verbatim in level 3. So level 3 is 800-171 plus an additional 20 practices. Those additional 20 practices, again, are taken from some pretty common security standards. So again, you can use documents like 853A to look and see if you're meeting the requirements or what you might need to do to implement those requirements. So there's a lot of tools out there for everyone currently to start looking into, doing your own self-assessments and doing your own gap analysis to have people, get an understanding of where you are currently. And I'll go ahead and stop there.
Great. Thank you. That was perfect framing. Okay, can we switch over to Jim? Jim, your perspectives of what's achievable across industry near term?
Thanks, Terry. That just kind of what Johan said, which was excellent. As a defense contractor, we really view DFAR 7012 and NIST 800-171, of course, as the minimum in cybersecurity. Even if you don't have CUI all over the place, and let's face it, most of us have CUI within our enterprise. So, it was always a minimum set of best practices. Earlier today, Norma Cram pointed out that the controls in 800-171 overlap, or should say intersect, with a lot of other compliance frameworks. If you're in the finance industry, If you're in medical industry, you have compliance frameworks that talk about the same kind of controls, the same kind of practices. So again, DFARS today, 800-171 is something we should all be doing anyway. If you look at the additional controls in CMMC level 3, they're quite reasonable, quite natural if you're currently DFARS compliant. So CMMC3 should be a given. Now, our company in particular is very cloud enabled, so we rely on a lot of third-party services. This is where things get, I won't say complicated, but you really do need to work with your third-party providers. For instance, if they're FedRAMP or they meet DoD security reg guidelines for cloud services, that's a start. But keep in mind that you're not going to get to levels 4 and certainly not to levels 5 unless you make sure all of your services, all of your supply chain that influences your security controls are also compliant. Now, given that, just because your third party is compliant doesn't mean that you're using it in a way that makes you compliant as well. So the good news, as Johan said, it is very straightforward. It's something we should be doing today. I was on a seminar the other week, and the worry was, what about the 1 or 2 person company? Well, the good news is it's fairly straightforward for them too, especially if you use third-party services. So it's a holistic approach, if you will, sometimes called an ecosystem that we have to manage.
Perfect. Thanks, Jim. Yeah, let's do a little bit of a twist. Can we focus from the perspective of a small or mid-sized contractor? Especially, I frame it with, they don't have a CIO, they don't CISO. What's achievable across them in the near term? And any other perspectives that you want to bring up?
Well, most certainly, SMBs, you mentioned, without having that dedicated security leadership, or understanding with frameworks or other standard requirements, getting support from leadership about why these controls need to be implemented, and having that carry that down, that mission down to the data owners and the staff, so that they implement it in the right way, and also that have the buy-in to actually do it effectively. And for a small business, there's a little bit more work to be done than for a large business, because what typically happens with businesses, they already adhere to some kind of framework, they have at least done a gap analysis, they have to where they need to be. Well, small businesses usually the budget does not exist. There's a nice budget sometimes, though sometimes it's also just ad hoc. There's a specific security budget. Now, what organizations, the SMBs, at least now that CMMC is still relatively new, is at least start identifying all the pieces that of the CMCC and what's going to look like. Now, the good news of a small business is that it's likely that you're just a relatively small fish in the supply chain. You likely only need to comply with the rules of CMCC, which are relatively easy to implement, are more or less specific. On the other hand, however, the downside of being SMB is that when you handle a lot of classified data sensitivity higher levels, that there will be a monetary and time investment, technology, processes, procedure, and the staff that you all need to implement, which is more difficult to bear for a small organization with a limited budget. As the CMMC is relatively new, what organizations, especially SMB, should do right now is having a look at frameworks, trying to identify where on the level of maturity they're going to end up, and look at what's already in place and what pieces and how they get there. To get it stuff is going to take some time, especially if you've got nothing in place yet. You're going to need to develop procedures, policies, all those things. But luckily, the CMM is to that point.
Thanks, Felix. Just so you know, you're coming in equally broken as Ed is. So when we back, we'll do a sound check and see if we can include you in the discussion. I think the global pandemic is eating up our bandwidth. So for those of us that have good bandwidth, hopefully we can move forward. So the next question is focused on an industry perspective of what are the mutual responsibilities across the different players, starting out with government. In other words, what do we think we'd love to see from government? So I'd like to start off with that, which is, I think, framing the CMMC controls and approaches and levels and pulling all the different standards together has been extraordinarily helpful and a foundational effort. What I would like to see is maybe a little more description of really what are the responsibilities of the primes and what is expected from the small and mid-sized businesses. Ed, do you have a perspective of where, what government could do further to enable the adoption and implementation of CMMC broadly?
Yeah, are you able to hear me now? I switched over to the phone, so maybe that improved things.
Yay, much better.
Yay.
You're in.
Good. I kind of alluded to this earlier and maybe didn't come through, but I think CMMC has done a really good job of making the requirements at the base level, making the requirements more clear than they were under 171. They've added examples, they've added explanations into the standard. We're expecting to see some assessment guidelines that I think are going to make that even more clear. So certainly that's a government responsibility that they've stepped up to quite a bit. Things we're still waiting on maybe are some guidance on inheritance and how inheritance is going to work. And a question that I keep hearing over and over is, please tell us what the CUI is. Please help us to identify that. I've heard contractors say if the government doesn't label it, I don't have to protect it, which I don't think is true, although I'm not a lawyer. But I think there's been some confusion over who really qualifies. Katie talked about the cleared defense contractors, those people who have security clearances, certainly. But I think there's people who are outside that who maybe aren't sure which things need to be protected and which things don't. I think CMMC is going to go a long way by specifying a level that's required in the contract. So I think that's going to help us out.
Oh, perfect. It came in 100%. So for moving to the phone. Jim, you have perspectives about regard primes, how government could enable the primes to take this on fully?
Yes, and following up on what I said, first of all, we do need to see those assessment guidelines because the best thing to do is to audit off before the assessors come, and they're about to be released. So it's one thing to have the controls, but to see how they're going to be assessed against you is extremely helpful. One thing the primes can do is really need to help the small partners. For instance, one thing that you can do is if you have a partner or a subcontractor, especially a small business, struggling and has CUI, the prime should really consider perhaps setting up the infrastructure or allowing the partner to come onto the prime's infrastructure. That works in I shouldn't say the other direction, but that works upward as well. One thing I think we need to encourage the government, specifically the agency or service that's contracting us, is if they want, especially level 4 or level 5, maybe establishing a consortium, especially when it comes to cloud services, where you can do the work on a combined structure. So then not just talk amongst each other, but help out each other. One thing we don't want to do is we don't want to build stovepipe disparate systems that each have to be certified, especially at the higher levels. So I think as a prime, we could both help our subs and help our client in bringing all the community together and fielding something that we're safe with the risk management.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I realize that the whole appraisal framework is not mature and fully completed. But Johan, do you have thoughts about in a perfect world how that could be set? Any framing thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. So we know the accreditation body is going to be working on this, and we hope to start seeing this. One thing that everyone needs to understand is that there are going to be organizationally defined parameters that are going to have to be released by the DoD or the accreditation body. And what I mean by that is if you look at some of the requirements, 800-171 said, the organization needs to decide how many login attempts can occur before the system locks down. Well, with this new CMMC program, my assumption is going to be that the DoD and the accreditation body are going to say specifically that number. So they'll say 3 login attempts before the system locks. That's kind of a rudimentary example, but when you start thinking about things like level of encryption, types of monitoring that are going to be allowed, types of traffic that are going to be allowed or explicitly denied, we need to see those ODPs sooner rather than later in order to understand really what level 3 is asking for and really what levels 4 and 5 are asking for. So that's something that's going to be very important. And it's also just a little bit of a concern, not a concern, but just a curiosity, because I don't know if anyone noticed, but in CMMC requirements version 1, some of the real world examples and discussions reference stuff that's not real common on the street right now, such as FIPS 140-3 validated encryption, which is not really a standard right now. FedRAMP requires FIPS 140-2. So if they're going to require that type of stuff, it's going to be very important for us to know that very soon. That way we can start to understand, okay, yes, it's level 1 or yes, it's level 3, but you are going to have this level of encryption or, this type of monitoring, or these ingress and egresses are going to be allowed versus these ones explicitly being denied.
Excellent. Tom, you also, do you have thoughts out from the certifying authorities and the appraisers' perspective of how to move this forward, how to fast track it?
Well, so I appreciate the question. So, I mean, as an assessor of with several other frameworks and frankly in private industry, we get these questions a lot. It comes down very often to auditor's judgment, as we call it in our industry. And so this is why I think it's really important to, I think, a comment that was earlier made. The time is now, to start thinking about the system, the environment that you have, the nature of data that you would be handling as a part of a contract, and work with your third-party providers, work with your IT folks, and work with some industry professionals familiar with NIST 800-171 that have done those type of assessments that may end up being a certifying partner, to start just asking those questions and fleshing them out so that there aren't surprises when it comes to undergoing the certification audit.
Great. Are you volunteering to participate in that process?
Sure. Well, it's always better to flesh out questions early than it is to do it late. Questions late in an audit are never good.
Thank you so much. So several of you have a governance and compliance and audit background. Is there low-hanging fruit for small and mid-sized businesses? Because, of course, with the primes, right, they've got entire offices and a volume of expertise in this space. But for the smaller or mid-sized businesses, is there fruit that they can jump on right away regarding the governance, risk, and compliance, or the documentation of their processes to get to level 1? And I'm opening it up. Who'd like to talk first?
Hey, this is Felix. Just jumping in here. I think the way the CMMC is structured is done in a way to make it easy for SMBs to start building their security resiliency with the model of the multiple levels, and level 1 being significantly easier than level 2, and then being cumulative in the sense that if you want to be level 3 compliant, you need to be level 1 and 2. It gives every single organization a good entry point into obtaining a level of certification, and therefore slowly building their resiliency. I think especially for businesses that haven't done it before or are still working on building their initial security hygiene framework, having a guided method of getting to the level they need to be is going to be very helpful, as it becomes manageable and it won't become too much of a complicated situation where they don't know where they need to start or where they need to end. The CMMC clearly dictates this is where you start, get all these pieces in place, and then you can move on to the next level. So for the organizations that don't necessarily have the in-house expertise, it draws a path for them to either acquire that expertise and acquire the solutions necessary in a structured and controlled manner.
Excellent, Felix, and you're coming in clearly, just so you know. So thank you. I'm sorry. Who is
I switched to phone audio, so yeah.
Ed, got the floor.
Ah, good. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't hear the response there. Terry, I've been suggesting to people to really start with maturity. I think that's the ripest fruit out there. I think, and the reason is two. One is it's something that when you get to an audit, you want to show track record. You want to show that it's been in place and working for some time. So doing those maturity things first is important. And the other is it's not naturally occurring in small businesses, right? So I think you look at the business drivers, the operational drivers in a small business, their IT shops don't need the level of maturity around things like configuration management, for example, that are required by CMMC. Just to be operationally effective, they can get a long way with word of mouth, with ad hoc processes, and things work pretty well. Big companies, need that maturity, those rigor, because they have a more complex situation, but SMBs really don't. So these are new behaviors that they need to put in place. Policies, SOPs, plans, configuration management, incident response, all those things I think are really, really good places to start. And again, not something they would probably have there. They're not required by 171. It's all new requirement, maturity requirements in CMMC.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Terry,
yeah.
Terry, let me add something here. This is Jim. The small businesses actually are at an advantage in some ways. The infrastructure is small. You can get the people to understand the infrastructure in a room. Maybe it's like you had said. Maybe it's just one person. There's not this complexity of, all right, if we need to implement certain control, or if we need to have a process for configuration management, that may actually be one person. And my advice to get the CMMC guidelines, or better yet, get 800-171 as a small business, get those knowledgeable IT people, knowledgeable enterprise infrastructure people in a room. And first of all, take a nice breath. Look at the requirements, look at the intent of them. If you want to know where to start in terms of tightening up your security controls, absolutely start with multi-factor authentication. If you don't have it, get it. If you don't get it, you are at enormous risk. So even the 800-171 recognizes the fact that that's a primary control. You feel badly if you don't have MFA. So there's a logical place to start. Being smaller in some ways is better. So take advantage of that. Look at the guidelines, breathe, and take your time.
Thank you. I'm going to push back just a little bit as a small business, which is when you look across the TFARs and the 171 and the myriad of controls, if you don't own your own infrastructure, if you don't have a sophisticated operation, then most of those controls don't apply to you. So I personally think what would be helpful to small and mid-sized businesses that maybe, contract out a lot of their IT or security is, what is that compressed list? We often use the CIS controls because they're more applicable. They map to NIST, right? But they're more applicable. to a smaller mid-sized business. And so it's really, kind of cheat sheets like that I think would be very helpful to give them on ramp, because when you look at the gamut of everything that applies under CMMC, it could scare the heck out of you into not taking action.
Well, put your vendors to work. Put your third-party providers. Really, and I'll use Microsoft as an example, or maybe I should use Neosystems. Have controls that help you and maybe even make you CMMC compliant. Let them take first crack at. Look, you have A, B, and C. Maybe you only need D. I'm a big proponent of putting our vendors to work, so that might be a place to start as well.
Okay, that's a good tip. Okay, we're hearing earlier from Katie Arrington about the volume of defense industrial base companies, right? 330,000 plus, and I would say that is a heck of a lot of scaling. All of you have technology backgrounds. Are there any automation approaches that could be leveraged that maybe you've seen for other areas, or maybe you've seen regarding cyber risk, cyber monitoring, cyber maturity and improvement that could be leveraged to scale the implementation of CMMC within a few years by waiting for 2025? Who has some thoughts?
I'll jump on this one. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
All right. So it's all going to depend on which area of or which domain of the CMMC certain items are in. There's items such as documentation and procedures and processes, and that can be automated to a large extent, as all the policies about hiring, about firing, about user education, those are going to be largely the same no matter which organization will try to implement them. So if we collectively build a standardized set of templates or processes that an organization can use then to just slightly tweak to fit their specific requirements, that can alleviate a lot of the manual work that would go into building those yourself. Now, on the technical side, a lot of the controls that you see are about auditing or log keeping or record keeping. And those also, similar to the policy development, can be defined on a computer, on an infrastructure term, right? As soon as we get the specifics, as in these logs or records need to be kept for this long, at that point, organizations or service providers can start building configuration changes that will just roll those out across the board. So I think there is a lot of value in automating a lot of it, and a lot of it we will be able to automate. But then there's also the pieces that are very specific to your infrastructure, to your systems, that will become a bit more tedious or a bit more complex to implement in a fully automated fashion.
Okay, great insights, Felix. I think, Tom, were you trying to chime in, or was it someone else?
Well, I would just echo that there are document management solutions, GRC tool solutions, governance risk and compliance tools that can help automate the management, if not even of the audit requirements of policy and procedure, to help standardize those across medium and larger organizations. Certainly helps streamline the governance effort.
Yep.
So this is Ed. I agree with what Tom and Felix said in respect to the administrative side for sure, and be able to automate that. I do want to give a little bit of a warning, though. I think on the technology side, every product that's sold to a government contractor in the next 5 years is going to be listed as CMMC compliant or somehow helping you with your compliance. And I think it's important to ask the vendor which specific CMMC requirements are met and what's the shared responsibility matrix. And we've seen this with FedRAMP. You have many services that are FedRAMP compliant. That doesn't mean they're all equal in terms of which piece of the compliance burden they take on and which they leave as something that has to be dealt with by the purchaser. So just ask, what are my responsibilities when I buy this product? What do you cover, and what are my responsibilities that are left for me to handle?
That's a great point, Ed. Responsibilities. You just can't buy compliance.
right. Okay.
And I kind of want to
do any, oh,
like
go
to
ahead,
jump
please.
in just real quick on that idea too. You know, that is so important for everyone to understand, both as service providers that are looking to help vendors achieve compliance. You know, if you offer an audit solution, like Ed said, make sure that you specifically say, these are the requirements that our product is going to help you meet. So if you buy our product, you will get X, Y, and Z. But also, you are going to be responsible for configuring this. There's a lot of platforms out there that are going to have to make better strides at really informing their customers. So if you're a service provider, think about that. Think about helping your customers, because that, you know, if I can easily go to you and say, I know for a fact, if I purchase your product, I'm going to be able to meet these requirements and I can get some sleep at night. That's such a value added, as opposed to, I'll even throw out Microsoft Office 365. Who's really sure about what it takes to make Office 365 171 compliant? They say it's possible, but there's some issues there that I have some questions about, and it's just not as transparent as I'd like to see. And I really would encourage service providers to try and make CMMC the framework that's as transparent as possible.
Okay, great. So a lot of cloud providers, right? I mean, a lot of businesses, majority of businesses have moved portions of their business operations or their data management or their data access and control, right, to commercial cloud provisioners. How can CMMC be baked into that? And could that be a way of giving some businesses a leg up on meeting a CMMC certification? Is that possible?
Terry, this is Jim. As a company who've moved most of their infrastructure to the cloud, you know, it's a double-edged sword. When you move to the cloud, and to dovetail on what Felix and Ed, Tom were saying earlier, you make sure your service provider, which in this case is a cloud, and maybe it is, you know, Microsoft 365. First of all, you have to provision a level of service that that's required for CMMC. I mean, that may mean government cloud, that may mean GCC high, may mean Azure high. It all depends on what kind of level you're going for, what kind of responsibilities that your clients expect. So again, just because you have all the mechanisms and the controls in the cloud doesn't mean you're using them properly, and doesn't mean they're configured properly. The other edge of that sword is, now that you're on the cloud, your risk profile is much different. I mentioned multi-factor authentication before, not by coincidence.
Mm-hmm.
If using a cloud service and you don't have MFA,
Right.
you're being hacked as we speak. So, you know, it's
Right.
It's very possible, just like cloud in and of itself. You know, it used to be, oh no, it's, you know, it's inherently insecure, and then it moved to, oh, it's inherently secure. The truth is, it's someplace in between, depending on what you provision and what controls you enable.
No, that makes perfect sense. So thank you for that clarification. So should primes, as they're struggling, right, with the accountability in many ways for taking care of their subcontractors or their vendors or their suppliers, should they form a consortium where they are responsible for a swath, right, of those subcontractors and suppliers, and then share that support so that it doesn't have to be done multiple times? Or are there other, you know, consortium partnership like models that could be implemented so that, again, this can scale and the burden can be shared? And any ideas on that?
Terry, this is Jim again. Perhaps, I'll give you one example, the NDISAC, National Defense Sharing and Analysis Center. That's kind of a mini DIB, if you will. Any company can join it that does defense business. Getting that kind of threat information from NDISAC can fulfill a lot of the level 4, level 5 threat intelligence requirements. So it works with that part. I don't know if it'll work with the other parts, but there's at least a model for sharing. Now, again, that's not sharing, with very small companies, because it costs several $1,000s a year to join NDISAC at a minimum. But it very well, that could be one model. I would prefer to see sharing with the government as well, having them put up, perhaps collaboration portals, perhaps services that we can come to as a prime community, and bring our small businesses with us.
Okay. Anyone else? Those are great thoughts.
Yeah, I just wanted
Yes,
to jump in on that. This is Johan. I just wanted to point out that in the original NEO Systems conference back on January 28, Katie Arrington indicated that she was really, really excited about that idea as well. Kind of data sharing across major entities, including the DoD, because really the only way that we're going to get out in front of some of these kind of zero-day attacks that we're seeing now is to start correlating our heuristics data and our signature data, and actually starting to recognize trends before they take hold on networks. Because even if you're level 5, if you're seeing a new zero-day attack, actually what's happening right now in the world with COVID-19 and everyone kind of taking advantage of that is a perfect example of how it's next to impossible to really protect yourself if something has never occurred before. So she was very open to that. And then she's also very open to the idea of the DoD creating some type of marketplace where small and medium businesses can go and see services that have been vetted in some way. Obviously, this is all up for how it's going to be done, but that services that have been vetted that can provide them, level 4 or level 5 or level 3 services so that they could utilize them very easily. So it's very exciting and hopefully very, very interesting times coming up.
Well,
Sorry, go ahead. Who was chiming in? Thanks, Judy.
The primes are, responsible. Sorry, Felix, go ahead. I'll come after you.
No, you go for it. Apologies.
Okay. Terry, the primes, have a dependence on their supply chain, right? So in as much as the smaller, less mature members of the supply chain might need help, also the larger primes who may have already solved these problems from a cybersecurity perspective, they're dependent on their supply chain to get CMMC certified. So I think we're seeing a lot of motion by primes to try to help mentor and guide and even track their suppliers and how they're doing, provide them with some support. And on the kind of the extreme end of it, where you've got suppliers that maybe have no IT maturity whatsoever, so even level 1 is a stretch. We've talked to some primes about putting in some secure enclaves, places where contractors could come and work on the DoD information without having to worry about their IT that they run. For very small companies that really, maybe DoD work is a small piece of what they do, and so it doesn't make sense for them to invest in this, even like I say, even a level 1 certification.
Yeah, and
Great.
I think in general,
Felix.
a lot of the I think a lot of the cyber industry in general is already very common with knowledge sharing in general, due to it basically being a cat and mouse game at all times. And for us defenders or us organizations under attack to be able to withstand the constant developments, it's just in general imperative that we share that threat intelligence and that we share data in general. And I think it shouldn't be too much work or too difficult for us to extend that to a level where we can also try to tie it back to the domains more clearly in terms of what attacks are out there, in terms of the incident response, what should be our general responses to various types of incidents. In terms of the awareness and training, these are the items that are coming through, and this is how organizations should look at solving them. By doing that, especially for the SMB space, they won't have to reinvent the wheel every single time, which would be a huge loss of opportunity and time in general. So there's a lot of information that is ready to be shared. It's just not all compiled in an easily accessible space right now. And I think that's where we can really get a lot of value out of this.
Thank you so much. So before we go to closing remarks, where each of you can speak for a minute, last statement to make to the audience. as the token cyber intelligence person involved on the panel, I have seen the advent of publicly available data sets and cyber risk baked into AI algorithms, and the ability to provide situational awareness of cyber risk across entire sectors. Do any have any experience with those kinds of technologies like Expanse and Insight and Riskcon and OURD, and the ability to be able to see trends and then have that as a lens from the outside in across the defense industrial base? Any thoughts of how that could play into CMMC?
Hey, this is Johan again. Yeah, absolutely. And that's sort of what I was alluding to earlier, is that those tools are absolutely phenomenal. Augmented intelligence is without a doubt the wave of the future when it comes to network monitoring. But the intelligence is only as vast as the network that it sits on. And that's why I was really excited to hear that Katie Arrington and DoD was interested in creating some sort of database that would greatly expand anyone's network footprint. Because, you know, if you're one of the huge primes, your network is very large and you can gather a lot of data points. But if you're a small or medium business, even if you have the most expensive augmented intelligence tool, you might only have 1 or 2 ingress points that you're monitoring. So you're not really building a very strong footprint. But think if you had the ability to go to a marketplace and leverage one of those tools that was getting the data from all of the DoD contractors, you know, all of those signatures, all of that heuristic data was then available to you. Well, then your network becomes as big as all of those contractors' networks combined. And that's what's really exciting about these possibilities here.
Yeah. Johan, I could not agree with you more.
Terry, by definition, can't
Yes.
threat intelligence just by looking at the inside. You have to look on the outside, and intelligence services that help you correlate between what you're seeing on the inside of your infrastructure and what's occurring on the outside. That those kinds of services are, I think, the primary third-party assistance. We're not talking necessarily a full MSSP. We could about, you know, just endpoint detection services or just simple threat intelligence feeds with the tools to be able to apply them to what you're seeing on the inside. So by definition, you know, not only do you need tools, but you need data inside.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Okay, so in wrapping up, I thought I'd circle back with Ed. So just a few parting remarks for the audience.
Thanks, Terry. It's early days on CMMC, right? So far, we're having a really good time working with all the early adopters. These are defense contractors that see good cyber hygiene as a competitive advantage, so they're in some ways excited to do it. We're really glad to see that DoD is listening to feedback and open to changing the program and fixing the glitches to make it work really smooth. So far, I'll say as a service provider, as we work to put together compliant reference architecture solutions, things that make economic sense and operational sense, CMMC looks really achievable to us. It's not simple, it's not necessarily easy, but it's achievable. And we think it's going to dramatically amplify the security posture of the defense industrial base. So yeah, I'm really liking where this is going.
Great. Felix, any closing remarks?
Yes, I'm very much agreeing with Ed there that the way this framework has been provided, how they laid it out with the various levels is a great way for organizations to be able to actually pull it off. NIST 800, 171, or 53 were always challenging, often were considered too difficult. And when things are too difficult and don't seem achievable, the organization just tries to rubber stamp it and not actually improve their security posture. So with this level 1 to 5, I think they've done a great job at making it achievable for organizations And overall, I'm excited to see the general security posture of the DoD contractors to go up, especially someone who works in the incident response industry. We often see attacks that are targeted against small companies with a very small or not proper security hygiene posture, so that they can be used to then attack the real target, a bigger company with more mature controls. And that's always a risk, those so-called watering hole attacks, where all the organization is stepping stone to a bigger fish. So by allowing a framework that's dynamic and has multiple levels of security hygiene, I expect to see those kind of attacks really going down and just improving the security and integrity of the supply chain as a whole.
Perfect. Tom, any closing remarks?
Sure. Yeah. I would just say that kind of reiterate the idea that it's not a destination, that this program is not a destination, that this is really going to require, for contractors, even the smaller ones, the development of a security program, ongoing process management, which is, kind of to echo the not a check the box exercise idea, that there will need to be processes, people involved, and the framework is going to evolve. The framework is going to change over time because the threat environment is going to change over time as it has consistently. So I would encourage contractors not to take a wait and see approach to see how this thing fleshes out. I would encourage contractors to get started that aren't forward thinking, as we've kind of talked about here, that maybe it's time to start thinking about where we are right now as an organization, so that we can begin to implement remediation and be prepared when comes certification time.
Perfect. Johan.
Hey, thank you. Just kind of rolling on what everyone else said. Believe it or not, no matter what, your organization has data that somebody out there wants and is valuable to somebody that probably shouldn't have it. So you really just need to keep in mind that this now is a really great opportunity for guys to start securing yourselves and making sure that you're protecting yourselves to the level that you should be and doing your due diligence. It's important that we all do that. It's like fighting this virus right now. If we all pitch in, it makes everything better. And like I said in my opening remarks, the tools out there to start looking at these levels and start understanding them are there. So don't sit around and wait. This is definitely coming. 800-171 has been around. So just go ahead and start taking steps to getting yourself secure.
Perfect. And not least, over to Jim.
I'll just add, let's not forget we are a business. We're all in the business of getting customers and keeping the nation safe. And CMMC is really an opportunity to make ourselves better and enable our business. And if that's not enough, because of the, I think, really first time big teeth that come with CMMC certification and the contractual requirements. I heard Katie mention today that DFARS is going to be changed in October to actually point to CMMC. It's something we have to do, but we do, and something we'll make money at. So, hey, let's go.
Okay, great panel. Thank you so much. I do want to add that I think anything that we can tee up that can help us to track certification process, the appraisal process, the automation, the documentation, anything put up there so that enable companies to fast track their way to CMMC certification is my call to action to everybody. So with that, Dave Gardy, I'd like to turn it back.
Thank you, Terry. Great panel. Sorry for some of the interruptions. We may try to re-record some of the segments in the beginning there before people switch to the phones. And we'd notified the panel after this, the last panel, the CMMC AB panel, that if they have an issue, go right to the phones. And Eric Crucis, who's the moderator, has been told about that. Right now, we're going to go to another sponsor message. This one from Ed Bassett, who is the Chief Information Security Officer for NEO Systems.